So I hear kids tell me a lot that they think that math is totally like a foreign language. And today, I'm going to kind of validate that opinion a little bit because we are going to actually do some translation. Now, when I say translate, when I think of translate, I usually think of, like say, in my house, my kids take Spanish. So that's what pops into my head. Translating something from English to Spanish. We get the English, right? And then we switch it over into Spanish. We're going to do something comparable. We're going to take words, though, and we're going to translate it into math symbols. So we're going to convert it. Now, raise your hand if you love word problems. I almost never get hands. I might get a couple. Thank you, CJ. All right, so I got at least one person. So most people say, word problems, they suck. But I personally feel like word problems get a bad rap because nobody, well, maybe not nobody, but pretty much almost never, is somebody going to come up to you and say, it's life or death. Solve 2x minus 4 is equal to 12. That's not going to happen. However, somebody might say something like, hey, this is the amount of money you have to spend. You need to do the math and figure out like how much you can afford. You're doing algebra. Those are word problems are actually where the real life is. Like they get a bad rap, but that really is the most important stuff. So today we're going to start by just writing some basic equations. And I'm not going to sit here and we're not going to take notes writing down what all these words mean. You just kind of need a list. You just need them there. Like we're not wasting time writing these down. That's why it's already in your notebook. But what I am going to do for the next few minutes and ask you to do is in this white space below, either add a text box or you can use the touch screen. If you want to write down what we're writing down on paper, you may certainly do that and add a picture too. If you're somebody that really just prefers to write on paper, I got no problems with that. You can grab a piece of my notebook paper and you can write and then add this in a few minutes. But what I'm going to do is give you a list of 4 things. There are 4 things that over the last 16 years that I've been teaching math, these are the mistakes that kids typically make. So I'm going to warn you about what those mistakes are. And that's why I call it great. You see written on your notebook, it says greatest hits. I don't have it on my version. Greatest hits and misses. Because these are the ones that kids have a tendency to mess up. And so I want to warn you about them ahead of time before we actually start doing practice with them, if that makes sense. So I would say the number 1. Well, actually, that's not true. It's probably actually the second thing we miss the most. So y'all add a text box, or if you want to write on paper, do that. But everybody should be adding a text box right now to get ready to write down what I'm getting ready to say. One of the number 1 issues that we have. Okay, so I don't know what the mental block is with this one, but a lot, and I do mean a lot of us, which is why I'm going to make that number 1. We have a mental block about the word quotient. I get a lot of kids who remember what the word sum means, difference, all of that. The one we mess up, we just have a mental block for some reason, is the word quotient. So add yourself a text box, number 1, with that word quotient there. And I'm going to give you an example of a problem that might feature the word quotient. Okay, so write this down. The quotient of a number and 3. So this is an example of a problem that you might be given, where you're going to be given the words, hey, write this into math, the quotient of a number and 3. So that's an example of the type of problem that you might have. And again, quotient, it's right up here under the division, right? This is how we would write it, okay? First of all, what does this mean, a number? What do we use if we don't know what that number is? We use a letter. I actually had a kid, no cap, that back in Oldham County, because I technically told him, I was like, you really don't, you could make a variable anything you want. We use X most of the time, don't get me wrong. And today I'm going to be boring and I'm going to use the letter X to represent it. But you can technically use anything you want. He literally used to draw a chocolate chip cookie for every single variable because it made him happy. And I'm like, well, technically, mathematically speaking, you're not wrong. I'm going to be boring and I'm going to use X to represent that number. So the quotient of a number and 3. And when you write that down, you just go in the order that it's written on the problem. So that means X divided by 3. And remember that we don't use that baby division symbol anymore. So in my problem, the mystery number came first. So that's what needs to go on top. The number 3 came second in the phrase, so it needs to go on the bottom. We're not using that little baby division symbol. So it's just going to be X over 3. Again, I don't know why we have a mental block about the word quotient, but my experience in the last 16 years is that we do. So I want to warn you about that. And you're probably going to bust me at some point. I'm going to end up giving you a worksheet that has that on there at some point. And you're going to be like, hey, quit using those baby symbols. And you're allowed to do that because I told you not to use it. But it's probably going to come up at some point. So that word quotient is always a big stumbling block for us. I like how a lot of you guys already figured out to use that front slash for division on your typewriter. Typewriter. What am I, like 90? On your keyboard. You know, when I was a kid and you made a mistake on a typewriter, you literally had to put whiteout on there. It was a big old thing. You couldn't just hit delete. Okay, any questions about number 1? Number 2, this is the most important one. This is the one that everybody messes up. I really probably should have put this one as number 1 on the list. And this is the phrase, this is an example of the type of problem you might see. My student's age, and I'm going to use the letter A to represent my student's age. See what I did just here? I did something called defining the variable. I told you what variable to use. We could really use anything. I'm going to be boring though. Okay, my student's age is, oh my God, I'm so old, 30 years less than mine. And I'm going to use the letter M. Seriously, I mean, I'm getting ready to be 45. Y'all are about, 14, 15, 16. I'm roughly 30 years older than you. Roughly. I'm old enough to be, especially back in my hometown where 30 years. So my student's age, A, is 30 years less than mine. Whenever you see something on my notes that is written in red ink, it is always, it's wrong, okay? I like to give you a lot of examples of doing it wrong because over the last 16 years, I've seen the same mistakes over and over again. It's kind of like I'm psychic. I kind of know almost exactly what you're going to do. And yes, I want you to write it wrong in your notes. I'm giving you this warning for a reason. Use it. So literally type that word wrong and get ready to put this wrong example, okay? I'm getting ready to show you an example of how to do number 2 wrong. I'm going to show you like the most common mistake that I see. So I see a lot of kids just kind of go in order of what the problem says. And since A comes first, they say A. And because it says 30 years less than, they think, okay, well, less than means subtraction. So I'm going to write that down. And then they're not really sure what to do with the M, so they just say that. So a lot of students just kind of read the order that it's written in the problem, and a lot of the time that's correct. That's the correct thing to do. That's why I'm showing you, like, specifically, this way is not right. Yes, it does say 30 years less. You are going to... I'm sorry?
It'd be 30.
You're almost. Okay. This is what we call, so now we're going to do it correct. So this is what we call a turnaround phrase. Whenever you see the words less than, yes, you're going to subtract 30, but because you think about it, does this make sense? If this is my student's age, how old are you guys? 15-ish. Take away 30, isn't that going to be a negative number? Y'all are only 15. If I take away 30, I'm not negative. I'm not a negative age. So if you even think about it logically speaking, writing it that way doesn't make sense. Taking 30 away from your age isn't going to get you my age, because that's going to get you negative. A turnaround phrase means that you actually write the last thing first. So you're going to take my age and you're going to subtract 30 from that to get your age. So when you see those words less than, 30 years less than, 50 less than, you kind of have to write it backwards. You're still subtracting 30, but you're doing it backwards. Can you wait? So less than, I'd say that's the number one thing that we miss, because you have to think of it as backwards. It's called a turnaround phrase for a reason, because you basically write, it feels backwards. Whatever I said last, you're going to put in there first. I guarantee you will see this on a quiz. Thank you. Woo, thanks. All right, number 3 on our greatest hits and misses. You might see something like this. 1/4 times the sum, bless you, of a number and 2. This is an example word for word of what you might see the problem looking like. 1/4 times the sum of a number and 2. And once again, I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it first. This is what I have a tendency to see kids do. Wrong way to do it first. It's barely wrong, but it's wrong. Okay? You do 1/4. We don't use that baby X for multiplication anymore, right? We use a dot because in algebra we use the letter X a lot for a variable and we don't want to get confused. So 1/4. And then sum. What does the word sum mean? Is that adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing? What is that? When we find the sum.
In this room's like 30 people, isn't it?
It is. So what's that mean, sir? I didn't hear you. So we're adding when we're doing the sum. So the sum of a number and 2 would be X plus 2, right? Because it says the sum of a number and 2. So this is almost right. Barely wrong. I'm going to show you why it's barely wrong. So what it is telling you to do when it says 1/4 times the sum, it's telling you to do to add first, right? Because if you don't have a sum, you can't take 1/4 of it in the first place, right? So you need to get that sum before you multiply it by 1/4. Because it's saying, hey, get a sum and then take 1/4 of it. But the way I have it written right now, does this ring a bell to anybody? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Yes. What do you do first? And please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Do you multiply first or do you add first? You multiply first. The way I have it written right now, you would multiply first and then add. But that is not what the question is telling me to do. It's saying to add first. So to correct it, I just need to make a small addition. I'm still going to put 1/4. I'm still going to say x plus 2. But in order to make it clear that I need to add first, I'm going to put parentheses around it. If I don't have a sum to start with, I can't take 1/4 of the sum. So I've got to have those parentheses around it. That indicates that I'm going to do that addition first, then I'm going to multiply it. So it's just a tiny, tiny difference. But that tiny difference makes the difference between getting full credit on your quiz and not full credit on your quiz, right? So that tiny difference makes a difference. Whenever you see something like that, like 2 times the sum, you want to do that addition first. Okay? Last thing, or I'm going to pause here for a second. You also might see a question where it says like 2 times the difference. It's the same idea. Difference means subtract. You got to do that subtraction first. So we got to make sure we put parentheses around that as well. And the very last thing, especially because I know 8th grade last year was a hot mess, technically what I'm writing here for number 4, you should have heard last year, but I know it was all different for different, different teachers, different schools. Because you're also going to need to remember what it means to cube a number. Anybody remember what it means to cube something? And that's okay. It means x to the, whatever the number is, you're doing it to the 3rd power. Cubing is just a way of saying taking something to the 3rd power. If we don't remember what 3rd power means, that's okay. I'm going to remind you of that at a different date. But right now, all we're doing is just kind of writing those down today. We also need to make sure we remember what it means to square a number. Instead of an exponent of 3, anybody know what that means? Oh, I know you know what squaring means. So instead of an exponent of 3, it means an exponent of 2. So let's just say on your classwork today / homework, if you see them saying you want to cube something, that means you need to take whatever it is and put it to the 3rd power. If they say square something, they want you to take whatever it is and make it to the 2nd power. And those are the 4 big things that we have a tendency to miss out on here. Yes, sir.
So when you say cube and you say to the 3rd power, does that mean like if I had 3 cubed, I would do 3 times 3 times 3?
That is exact. Or can we even change that a little bit? Let's say, so it's not the same number.
Okay.
Let's say we got 2 to the 3rd power. That means we do 2 times 2 times 2. Correct. Because that exponent tells us we're multiplying 2 by itself 3 times. Yep, that's exactly what it means. All right, y'all. So